Hey everyone, welcome back to Integrative Psychonautics. Hope you've been doing well out there. So today's video is going to be what for some of you might seem like a really kind of ambitious, big, broad topic, and that is, what is the secret to happiness? How do we become more happy? What defines a happy life? How do we understand happiness more clearly? And what are some of the common mistakes that people make in terms of how they think about happiness and try to approach having a happier life? So if that's you, if that sounds of interest to you, please do watch on. Okay, so before we go ahead and get into the main content here, I wanted to just take a couple minutes and provide a little commentary, a little framing up front for you guys before we go ahead and discuss the different kind of facets to happiness that I think are really relevant for a lot of you here. So the reason I'm making this video quite simply is because this is a theme that has been coming up. This has come up in a couple client sessions. This has come up in my socials. This is kind of seems to be a thing that I'm seeing around me kind of ambiently in life. And I like to coach to these kind of emergent, zeitgeisty moments of themes that are arising that people may kind of need new information or initial information on. So I decided to just kind of capitalize on this kind of synchronicity that I'm seeing in my life and speak to it and offer some of my thoughts about this. You may look at me and you may look at kind of this empty room and my, lack of impressive dress here. And you might be like, well, this guy seems like a slacker. What does he know about happiness? What has he learned about happiness? Surely he can't be that happy in his life. To which I would say, I understand why you would draw that impression or conclusion based on my presentation here. But I actually do have a lot to say about this. And I would encourage you to, try on some of the angles and perspectives I have to share here. Happiness is something that I feel like is pretty consistent and stable in my life right now and has been for quite a while. And I have a lot of insights and angles to offer on it. And it's something that's been hard won. I've certainly gone through my battles with depression and anxiety and trauma and grief and you name it. So I'd like to just kind of give you some of the initial insights that I think start to open up this conversation. For me, this is kind of obvious stuff, and you may find for you as well, some of this might be familiar material, but hopefully there's something useful here for you. And I realize that for perhaps a bunch of people, they've never really thought about happiness much beyond just kind of the unconscious impulse or drive to be happier. I want to be happier. I want to feel happy. I don't feel happy in my life. So, I'm going to do whatever I think are the things that are going to make me happy. So perhaps by talking about it, by offering you some new maps or models or some familiar maps or models that might be kind of a looping back around to an old point of insight for you, this will be a useful conversation in terms of just helping you orient and understand what it actually means to be happy, to live a happy life, and what the common mistakes are that we usually make as we're kind of moving ourselves away from happiness. So enough said, let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, so I want to just lead the beginning of this conversation in the video here with what I think is perhaps the most important point, that if I can kind of wave a wand and have you take away anything from this video, this would be what I want you to understand. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a recent description of an interaction with a client without giving out too much information, but just kind of the basics of this conversation, because I've had some form of this kind of conversation with a lot of people over the years, and it really kind of hammers the point home. So we were talking about life improvement and goals and goal achievement and the next things that this person wants to do to improve their quality of life and feel better and feel happier. And as we started to unpack it, everything was, predictably a materialistic goal, right? So it was about money, it was about appearance, it was about, lifestyle changes and choices, it was about, dating and getting into relationships, this kind of a thing. I asked them if they thought that these changes would really make them happy or not, or how would they know that these changes will make this person happy? And they kind of stopped and paused and reflected, and I just kind of brought it home for them really quick. I'm like, well, what's the point of having all these things? What's the point of making a bunch of money? What's that going to do for you when you have that financial freedom and security? What's the point in dating someone that you really like and getting into a relationship and falling in love and maybe, building a long-term relationship? What's the point in acquiring the things you want or having the kind of job you want, the kind of lifestyle you want? What is that going to do once you've acquired those, once you have those in place? And, they were like, oh, That's a good question. What does, what comes out of that? What arises, gee, I don't really know. And as we kind of unpacked and talked about it more, what I pointed out, and this is really the message I want you to take from this entire video, is that underneath all of the pursuits to happiness that we kind of subscribe to in our lives, whether those are, events and experiences we want to have, or travel, or relationships, or what have you, whatever it is you think is going to make you happy that's out there in the world, that's a material, physical experience. What all of that points back to is a state, is a feeling, is a way of being, is some way that it's going to cause you to feel, right? And so this is the thing I really want you to deeply understand. Underneath all our different drives and desires and things and all the drama around whether we're happy or not, generally speaking, all of those point back to what's essentially a state of mind, a state of emotion, a state of being, a feeling in the body, in the mind that we assume we're going to have once we have all those things. And so this really invites an interesting inquiry, which is, well, what is the point in pursuing all these things if I can have the feeling anyways? If I can understand that feelings and states and ways of being and thoughts and emotions are things that I'm generating internally, that we all generate internally. We may have them in reaction or in response to external stimuli, but fundamentally, where do they occur? They occur inside our nervous system, right? So because of this, if we recognize that this is the fundamental end output of whatever it is we're pursuing, then we can, sometimes, not always, cut to the chase and really get down to what really makes the difference, which is our state, and working with getting into a happier way of being internally, recognizing that the externals may or may not deliver that state. But if we work more directly towards that state we want to feel, that sense of well-being or peace or joy or contentment or excitement at life, those are all things that are available to us more immediately, that we don't have to go through this long-winded, circuitous pursuit of a material experience that hopefully delivers that. I think this is really, really, really important to internalize and really wrap our heads around, right? So you hear this all the time, right? With celebrities, with rock stars, with whoever, influencers. You hear the same story over and over and over, and it's its own genre, its own cliche, which is that they got the money, they got the house, they got the fame, they got the, the amazing sex life, they got the whatever, the car of their dreams, whatever the thing was that they were pursuing, they got it, and then they still weren't happy. In fact, maybe they were more depressed than before or more anxious than before. They, had everything. They had the perfect life, they often will say, but they still weren't fulfilled. They didn't feel connected. In fact, maybe they felt more isolated because now they are in this very top, not even 1%, beyond 1%ers, and they're still not, feeling that sense of fulfillment and happiness and well-being. I think we all know this kind of casually, superficially, as a theoretical thing out there in the world. Yeah, some people get the money, get the car, get the house, get the partner, and they're still not happy. What we fail to do is internalize that lesson, and learn from their mistakes and go, oh, that can happen to me too. So the first point I want to make here is that happiness is a state that occurs inside of you that is different from the material experiences you have. Material experiences may provide pleasure and may provide fulfillment or well-being temporarily. Now, let's be honest, sometimes you have a new experience and it does bring with it a certain sense of fulfillment, enjoyment, happiness, etc. But the thing is, those aren't enduring states usually. They tend to go away, or we tend to kind of, have the hedonic adaptation where we kind of numb out to these things. The thing to really internalize here is that your happiness and whatever your material situation is, yes, there's some overlap there, but they are not one-to-one. They are not the exact same thing. So this means that you can work towards happiness regardless of your situation. You can earn happiness. You can experience and discover happiness regardless of your situation. And also, you can have material things and have experiences and prosperity and financial abundance and security and have happiness or not. So I want to be really clear about this before we move forward. Okay, so now that we've gotten that out of the way, and hopefully that's all super clear for you, I want to start to contextualize this and plug this into what I commonly see when clients come to me. So more often than not, when a client comes to me and wants to work with me, and there's some piece about wanting to be happy there, whether it's, I'm, terrified I'll never be happy, I feel dissatisfied with my life, I want to be a happier person, I want to have a happy future, this kind of a thing. More often than not, what I see once we start to unpack it and I start to learn more about it and they start to explain it to me, generally speaking, the drama involved in not being happy is that we are in some way anxious, depressed, hopeless, feeling disconnected, longing for, needing some form of our survival drives being met, right? So I want to be clear that as human beings, we are wired up to feel a certain amount of reward for fulfilling certain drives that are kind of wired into us as the creatures that we are. So generally speaking, what are some examples of this? It's all the obvious stuff, and people think that these are the actual goals in life, but these aren't actual goals. These are just your genes screaming at you to make sure that you survive and pass on your genetics to the next generation, right? So what are they? Obviously sex, obviously money, obviously, or security, abundance of resources, feeling safety, having shelter, having, all the things that you want materially, having status, being liked, being respected, being kind of ascending in terms of being someone of importance in whatever communities you're involved in, right? What are some other ones here? Having some personal power, some autonomy, having some freedom, whether that looks like travel to you or whether that looks like choice and lifestyle to you. Let me see, what are some other kind of real basic, these, I'm going to stop there. Hopefully you get the gist. Most of the things you see in the personal development world, or that you see that people kind of have drama around in terms of, I'm not happy in my life because ... right? Whatever's going to follow that because is, generally speaking, going to be some form of unconscious survival drive. Now, I want to be clear that there's nothing wrong with fulfilling our survival drives, and I do think in general, having those needs and desires met to a certain degree does bring a certain amount of satisfaction or sense of well-being or comfort with it, but only to a certain level. And I think we massively distort this and kind of lionize this stuff and kind of over amplify this stuff in our culture and think that these are what it means. These are the meaning of life. This is what it means to be alive. This is what it means to live a good life. This is what it means to live a happy life. That somehow, when I get all my survival needs met and I get into that place where they're all being met, I will be happy and content. And what a lot of people find out is when you get your survival needs met frequently enough, what happens is more like you forget about them. They just stop being a problem, but they don't necessarily equate or translate into a state of happiness, a state of fulfillment, a state of well-being. So let me give a couple obvious examples here. Food, right? So, or water. If we are starving or thirsty and we haven't had food or water in a while and our body is screaming at us to eat or drink, once we get that first bit of food or water, it is a profound moment of fulfillment and well-being, let's be honest. But if you are eating regularly, if you have regular access to some form of food, and you have clean enough water that you're hydrated, you can drink water whenever you need to, generally speaking, it doesn't become more fulfilling to have more food, right? It doesn't become more fulfilling to drink more water. They kind of just become this okay, well, that's taken care of kind of category in our life, and they kind of just disappear from our consciousness. Same is true for relationships, for intimacy, for sex, for, again, for status, for et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These things that we think we want more often than not, that we get all these elaborate kind of, complex relationships to when there's drama around. And if we don't have them, we're super upset. And if we have them, then, our culture is a mess around these survival drives because we don't recognize that they're very basic drives from our genes telling us what to do. And they aren't some cultural pinnacle of being a human being or being alive. So I want you to really get this. I want you to really recognize that most of what the drama is about, of what we think is going to make us happy, isn't about happiness, and that these things, these survival drives, that if and when we fulfill them, they aren't guaranteed to make us happy. Let me give another example here. For a lot of people, if you've never been in a romantic relationship or a long-term relationship, there can be this profound, intense desire and longing for that kind of partnership. And we assume that we're going to be happy when we're in a partnership like that. And then people get into partnerships and relationships. Maybe it's with the wrong person. Maybe it's with a great person, but they don't have the relationship skills in place. Maybe they have the skills and it's the right person, but even still, it just they tend to go kind of complacent. They tend to go like, oh, this is nice, but it's just kind of this coasting, disengaged version of being in a relationship. Or it's hard, or it's more challenging, or it's brings with it a lot of complications to life. Like maybe you don't get along with your in-laws. Maybe they have quirks that you don't know how to deal with, or they have sides to them that turn you off, but you love them. It gets complicated, right? And it's not so simple as, oh, when I'm in a relationship, then I'll be happy. That's not a guarantee. There are a lot of people who suffer more in relationships than when they're not in a relationship. So this is another example of what I mean, where, again, when we get our survival needs met, it doesn't mean we're going to be happy. And so I really want you to make this distinction between survival needs and these survival drives, which includes things like our desire for fame, our desire to be a great whatever, be good in our career, be a great artist or a great, whatever, a great social media person. All of that stuff isn't really about that. It's about these unconscious tribal human genetic drives for belonging, for being relevant in our container, for having all our needs met, et cetera, et cetera. So I know I'm kind of being redundant here, but I hope you get this. I hope you see this. This is not the same thing as happiness. Okay, so with all of that established, let's get into what happiness actually is, okay? I want to make a distinction here actually between happiness, as a lot of people think about it, which are these kind of short-term spikes of maybe dopamine or serotonin, of, having an experience that brings some amount of pleasure or kind of short-term enjoyment with it, versus what we might think of more as like fulfillment, or deep well-being, deep peace, deep contentment, deep enjoyment of our experience of being alive, okay? I want to separate those out. Those are not necessarily the same thing. So we could kind of think of it a little bit as like happiness, quote unquote, in the more childish, superficial sense of the word, versus what might be more like fulfillment, which would be like this more long-term, lasting, deep sense of contentment and enjoyment in life. Now, the reason I bring this up is for a lot of people, there's this common misconception, which I do think is often rooted in kind of childhood logic, of consumption of the things that I want gives me dopamine spikes of enjoyment, or pleasure, and that done frequently and often enough equals happiness or a happy life, right? And I think that this is a very flawed conception, a very flawed recipe for what happiness truly is. And I think, quite honestly, a very shallow understanding of what happiness really is. I think happiness is so much more than these spikes. So let's be clear, when when you're a kid and you get the toy that you've been wanting all year at Christmas, or you have an amazing birthday party and you are like a rock star amongst your friends and you have the best birthday cake and it's like this peak experience of a day, or you, et cetera, you beat the game that you've been trying to win for months and months. These kinds of peak experience moments can be very intense. They can be really rich with a sense of reward in the short term. And so sometimes these are the first moments that some of us, recognize as happiness. What we often don't recognize as happiness are all the moments of just general well-being as we're going through life, especially when we're young or kind of like in childhood or into our teenage years. A lot of times we don't recognize that happiness can be these kind of simple moments, or these days where things just kind of went smoothly, or where we, had a nice meal and some nice quality time with someone or something like that. And we don't recognize how much just this kind of fundamental sense of fulfillment and well-being of a life well lived is. And this is the kind of thing where if you've ever gone through a period of depression or stress, or you've really lost your access to any sense of well-being, you look back on moments in your life, maybe when you're younger, and you go, gosh, it was so good. I had it so good and I had no idea. I was so much happier than I knew I was, right? And this is something I want to kind of highlight here, because a lot of times, we don't realize when we're happy, when we're fulfilled, rather, when we're deeply fulfilled. And we're only looking at, again, fulfilling our kind of survival drive needs and looking for these spikes of what we think is going to give us happiness, which is nearly always fleeting. So I hope you're starting to get this sense that like what real happiness is, in my mind, is actually something more like fulfillment. Something more like this deep sense of well-being that comes from enjoying your embodied, lived experience just in the day-to-day, moment to moment. And that can be kind of amplified and ridden into these kind of peak experiences. And there's nothing wrong with going from fulfillment to a peak experience, then back to fulfillment. What I think is sad and tragic is when people mistake these peak experiences for a lasting happiness, or they think that materialist, experiences, eating the food, meeting the person, going to the event is the same thing. These spikes are the same thing as what it means to truly be deeply, fully integrated with happiness. So I want to just kind of make that clear point. But I want to start to highlight even more clearly what exactly creates happiness from my point of view and in my experience. So I want to be clear here with you guys that the science is pretty there. It's well documented. It's well tread. This is well-known territory, that what creates happiness for people is some form of, essentially meditation, which is wild to say, but it's really true. What I mean by this is what creates real happiness is the moments where we are really present with our life experience. Right? So it might be as simple as a day where you're, walking through the park alone or with somebody. Maybe you're watching animals, you're watching squirrels or pigeons, or maybe it's a moment where you are, playing an instrument if you're a musician and you're just really present with the instrument, or a moment where you're in a good conversation with someone. And it's not that about what you're talking about necessarily, it's that quality of connectedness and presence between you two that when you reflect back upon, it becomes this really beautiful memory, or this beautiful moment where you realize you were deeply happy. So what creates happiness, quite simply, is our attention, our quality of presence, our ability to be aware of the present moment. And this really, this is something I've tried through trial and error a lot, through, letting myself be wild and unconscious, through chasing all the materialist, hedonistic spikes over a long period of time, through going to the events, through obviously taking the psychedelics or the other kind of pleasurable drugs, through you name it, right? And what I found over and over and over when I return back to what is enduringly fulfilling, enduringly joyful, pleasurable, meaningful in my life, it is the moments, and it doesn't matter if I was at a concert and having a peak experience, or at a rave, or at Burning Man, or if it was literally just, me and a friend taking a slow stroll on a nice day. What unites all of those experiences together is the quality of my presence in the moment. Conversely, I've been in, and maybe you can relate to this, some really powerful, what should be really amazing, positive experiences, that are like, amazing, maybe it's a great show, great, obviously, I went to a lot of concerts, I love music. Maybe it's, you went to an amazing event or an amazing dinner or what have you, but you're not present with it. Right? You're not paying attention. You're kind of in your own head. You're maybe someone said something that upset you and you're kind of like stewing on that from earlier. Maybe you don't really like the people you're around. And so you're feeling a little kind of closed off and not so connected and not so present with it. Those are generally the moments that even if the setting and the material circumstances are great, we're not happy. Right? So, I hope this, I'm not really necessarily trying to inspire you to meditate, but I do hope that maybe this starts to create a little motivation for you to meditate. But even just more deeply, whether or not you meditate, if you can cultivate this capacity for presence with your experience, being fully in your experience, fully tuned into catching the nuances of understanding the miracle of these ordinary moments of your life, this is where happiness comes out of. And the more you're present, the more, which kind of implies, by the way, we're more present when we've, healed, when we've let go of trauma, when we've let go of internal conflicts, when we've, nourished ourselves spiritually, emotionally, mentally, physically. It allows us to be more present. And when we're more present, we end up being just generally more happy, more in the space of, a synonym I like for it is well-being. Or thriving or at peace. I think these are all very overlapping states. And so, I just want to put this out there to you. The secret to happiness is your attention, is the presence of your mind, is the presence of your awareness, of your body, of the space around you, of the people you're interacting with. And in that's a whole art form to live that way, to live more presently, and doesn't require money. And once you get the hang of it, actually isn't that hard. Is very natural, and is really, interestingly enough, there's kind of a complexity here because often when we're not present, the reason we're not present is because we're hung up on thinking about material, again, survival drives that we think are going to make us happy, rather than simply being present with what we have and what is. So I know that might sound a little, cheesy or cliche, but it's really true in my experience that what creates happiness is presence. And since we're talking about presence here, I want to just kind of bring up a couple ways of thinking about presence from maybe a more Eastern spirituality, meditation, mindfulness kind of angle here, because I think it's really valuable. So in Eastern spiritual traditions, like Buddhist traditions, Hindu traditions, probably Taoist traditions, I'm not sure though, the way that they think of presence is that this is a natural capacity of our nervous system when we are, let's say, aligned, when we are centered, when we are healthy, when we are whole, when we are in our wholeness, which is always there, right? One of the things to understand about happiness and presence is that they are always available to us. It's always there. It's a natural part of how your nervous system functions when you're grounded in yourself, when you're kind of just here, when you're functioning optimally. In other words, when you're not caught up with a lot of worries, stress, issues that you're kind of tussling with because there's something unresolved there, when you're not caught up with a lot of, problem solving, whether that's, unnecessary problem solving or necessary problem solving, when you're, generally speaking, just able to fully return to yourself and not be caught up in all these places where our attention tends to go. Obviously, with social media, this becomes even more so exaggerated. We've got endless rabbit holes where our attention can get absorbed that take us away from ourselves. But the moment we return back to ourselves and we return back to our embodied experience, we return back to the present moment, is the moment that we start to recognize that underneath this is presence, that I can be present right here, right now. And that presence can be used in a really dynamic way. For example, high functioning states like flow states or athletic experiences or, being creative, the arts, music, drama, this kind of a thing. Those all require super present kind of states, but also even just in just being, right? And just simply being, you can return back to presence. And in that presence, you discover that you're already happy, regardless of how the circumstances around you are going. Now, I realize in our materialistic culture, in our modern culture, which is inundating us with information and places to put our attention that's outward and elsewhere, we may be very tempted to dismiss this message, to be like, there's no happiness already in me. No, I don't know how to be present. But that's really, really not true if you explore it. So I would encourage you all to explore this and just recognize that this is an innate capacity of the nervous system once you kind of center it. So that's my message for today on happiness. Let's just summarize really quick. We'll call it a video. Okay, so if you made it this far, thank you for making it all the way through the video. I'm trying to make these as succinct and find that right balance between kind of the long form explorative content that I like to make, kind of a conversation with you guys, but also at the same time making something that's a bit succinct and delivers on what it is I'm trying to say. So to summarize really quick here, we've got essentially that happiness is something that for a lot of us, we conflate with getting our survival drives met, so our survival needs met. And this includes a bunch of things. If you want to know more about where these survival drives are best understood, I would encourage you to learn more about evolutionary psychology, which is kind of rich with this understanding. And that a lot of times we conflate meeting those survival needs with feeling happy. The reality is that this is simply not the case, in that once you get those things, if it all goes right, what that's going to deliver is a state within you, which is what happiness really is. So happiness is a state. It's not something you consume your way toward necessarily. And it's something that's always available to you. It's innate in your nervous system. It's something probably closer to, if you're talking about lasting happiness, fulfillment, well-being, peace, being present, feeling fully embodied, than it is something like these spikes of excitement or these spikes of peak experience, peak moments. I do want to be clear, I'm not demonizing peak experiences, peak moments. I do think they're a valuable part of being a human being, important to experience, part of being alive, and I would encourage you to pursue them with the clarity that they are not necessarily what's going to provide you with deep, profound, lasting happiness. Last thing I want to just kind of summarize here, again, is that there's a distinction between what we might think of as happiness in the more materialistic sense and this kind of long, slow, ongoing fulfillment. I realize I'm repeating myself, but that's worth saying twice. Okay, that's it for this video. I hope you find it valuable. If so, do me a favor, leave a comment down below or a thumbs up, do the things, and I'll make more content like this. For some of you, again, this might be kind of stuff you already know. For others of you, this might be something that really clarifies something that's been a little bit confusing. I realize that this idea of happiness in our culture can be a nebulous, confusing thing. So hopefully this serves you in clarifying and understanding what it means to be happy and how to get there. And if you, of course, want support around that, if you would like to work with me on that in more specific detail, do reach out. My email is always down in the description of the videos down below. Much love to you all, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Take care.